Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We have a special presentation for you today as we talk about Military Appreciation Month and caring for our nation's heroes. It's a topic we need to be talking about as we think about all of the veterans and service members who've been affected by mental health and addiction. And I have a panel here today that is joining me that are experts in this topic or on this topic. We have CJ Jemison. He's a therapist at Desert Hope. We also have Dr. Stephen Ramos, a therapist at River Oaks, but he's also the assistant clinical director there. And then we also have Christine Hernando, who's a therapist at River Oaks. So thank you all for joining us. We certainly want to be able to get your insight on this topic. So Dr. Ramos, I'm going to talk to you about this. When we think about Military Appreciation Month, why do we need to really make sure that the conversation needs to talk around addiction and mental health among our service members and our veterans? Why do we need to be sounding the alarm?
Well, I think that the short answer to that is that we're losing veterans, we're losing active duty service members to addiction, to mental health issues, and suicide. So, throughout the years, we've been really targeting, whether it's the DoD or whether it's the VA, really targeting this problem. So we know the problem is chronic throughout our society. We understand that we are that folks are dying, whether it's by suicide, and we know how rampant it is with respect to folks self-medicating mental health issues with substances. And lastly, we understand there is a stigma that is sort of perpetuated on while folks are on active duty or in the Guard, where there's lots of barriers to them seeking care.
Yeah, I think that's important to talk about. And CJ, I know you're kind of boots on the ground with one of our programs there at Desert Hope, where we actually care for military members and service members and military first responders. What do you find that they're struggling with? Are they struggling now more than ever when you're seeing people coming into treatment? What are you seeing just from your perspective?
Yes, ma'am. So really, when we look at that stigma, is a really, really big thing as well. Even though the individuals come to treatment and they're very grateful and thankful to be in treatment, now it's kind of like opening up, being able to really say that I need help. Because what happens when we look at the military culture, it has a lot to do with, I don't want to feel like I'm weak. I've been made to feel a certain way. This is what we do in the military, and reaching out and even talking about it is huge. So one of the things I do as a therapist, and even within group therapy, is just letting people know, hey, it's okay. You are in a safe place to be able to express how you actually feel. So I spend a lot of my time just being able to just help people to be open about.
Oh, that's huge. I think, talking about being open, Christine, I know that a lot of people, like when we'll delve into this a little more, talk about stigma and all of that. How difficult do you find just with the veterans and service members that you work with, is it to be open or to share?
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult for them. These are the people who are used to handling things on their own. They can handle the tough stress situations, the life and death situations. So having to admit that they're what they perceive to be weak or vulnerable is incredibly difficult for them. The other part of it is they don't tend to want to share those issues with people. These are people who protect and serve. They want to protect the civilian population from the horrors of war. They don't want to have to share that. They're concerned about vicarious trauma. So it's very difficult for them to open up.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I want to go through is we actually have a list of some of the risk factors when it comes to addiction and mental health for our service members. Here are 4 things, and I kind of want us just to break down why these are risk factors, particularly for this population. And as you can see, scrolling on the bottom, we have some statistics. More than 2 out of 10 veterans with PTSD also have a substance use disorder. I know there are a lot of other statistics we're going to share today as well. But let's first talk about combat experience. Dr. Ramos, when you think about combat experience, why is that a risk factor for addiction? Because people may feel like maybe there's something just wrong with me. Why am I seeming to be the only one experiencing this? But from your perspective, take us through that combat experience and that being a risk factor.
No, so in my experience working with infantrymen, Navy SEALs, Rangers, those folks that had that combat experience, multiple tours in the combat setting, my experience with them has been they're going to get through those deployments by any means. They're going to show up for their wingman, their battle buddy. They're going to be there. So whatever it takes, even if I have to, sort of pretend, avoid, no matter what kind of psychological injuries I've sustained overseas, they're going to find a way. So even if that means that when there is alcohol and other substances available to them, that's going to get them through to the next day. And usually the goal is just to deploy again. Why? Because their fellow service members are back in the combat zone and they need them. And so I believe that that's the mentality.
And when we think about the combat zone, CJ, I want to go to you on this one. When we think about the combat zone, many people may think, well, hey, maybe I didn't see anyone who died during that time, but I'm still in that. Can that still be traumatic? Because I think people think, well, I didn't experience anything great, or maybe I did, but should that still lead to some level of trauma just from exposure?
Absolutely, ma'am. Absolutely. And a lot of it has to do, believe it or not, there are a lot of soldiers and a lot of veterans that actually have experienced trauma just because they were not even able to deploy. They felt like they have, yes, ma'am, they felt like, I have been left out. Whatever the reason that may have caused that individual to not be able to deploy, it's kind of like, I am supposed to be there helping my men. I'm supposed to be there to be able to help. So now that I'm not part of that, a lot of people really, and I was actually surprised by this, but a lot of people really struggle with that. And there's trauma associated with that. And it can be the vicarious trauma as well. It's really challenging. It really is on both sides, whether you experience it or not. So unfortunately, the substances become a way to cope.
Right. Yeah, I know we talked about substances really being a way to cope. And I wonder, Christine, do most people know that they've experienced this trauma? Are they even aware of it? Because I wonder, like CJ was saying, hey, maybe it was somebody who actually wasn't deployed or actual in the combat zone. Maybe they, were just supporting the team that was in the combat zone. And they're wondering, like, could this be me? And would they even realize it? Is it possible to be traumatized and not even know it?
I think part of the issue is that there's additional issues that our veterans struggle with, our service members struggle with, besides PTSD. So, yes, there are people who struggle with survivor's guilt because their buddies were killed in combat and they were not. There's moral injuries that go along with the combat experience where they're asked to do something that goes against their moral code, what they believe to be right. So they have to struggle with that as well. And most of them don't even realize that those are disorders, that they're problematic, or that there's help for it. So yes, it's quite possible that they don't even realize that they're struggling with it. I hear quite a few veterans say, I didn't even realize I had PTSD. I thought it was just normal.
Interesting. So I think that's really fascinating. I want to delve into that a little bit, that you could be struggling with PTSD and maybe not even realize it. So Dr. Ramos, how does that happen that you don't even realize it? Is it a denial, or how do we get to that point?
So yeah, I believe that it's either a denial or just an avoidance. I went and I worked with several service members who, kind of getting back to the reluctance to seek help, the repercussions behind that, so if someone is a parachute jumper, they go to mental health even for one visit, automatically they're like, no, you can't jump for 3 months. Or if they carry a weapon as part of their primary duties, they say, okay, so there's no weapons for you for 6 months, which not being able to do those things means I'm not going to deploy. So I do believe there's an element of that where you just sort of convince yourself that you're okay, so that you can stay in the fight, so that your peers don't look down upon you, or that you're not, being taken off the list to go back to Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever that deployment center is.
And CJ, I can hear you nodding your head going, because I wonder what happens if you don't deal with it. I mean, if you just, say, hey, this has happened, you're in denial, you're trying to avoid it. As Dr. Ramos said, you're worried about the impact it can have on your career. what happens if you don't? Because some people may think I'm going to be fine. I can manage this. I've got it all together. I can manage this PTSD. I can manage, I'm drinking from time to time, but it's not that big of a deal. What do we need to say to those military members?
Oh, yes, ma'am. So really letting the individual know that, hey, this is really problematic here. I know it may be perceived as kind of normal, but it's almost like taking a garbage can and just shoving it and shoving it. After a while, you're not going to be able to keep pushing things down, and it's going to come out and it's going to explode, and it comes out whether it's anger, behavioral issues, violence, so being able to let that person know that, hey, you have to begin talking about this, living like this is really not normal.
And will it get worse? So, I'm curious, because many people think if Christine, you're shaking your head too, but CJ, maybe both of y'all can piggyback on that. Will it get worse over time if it's not dealt with? If the mental health or the addiction, the substance use is not dealt with, is it progressive?
I don't know if Christine wanted to say anything, but absolutely. And it comes out in violent ways, unfortunately, or it can come out just in the tone of voice of how you maybe respond to your spouse, so it comes out. It's going to come out. That garbage can is going to be released, and it's not good.
I think from my perception and through my experience, I think that we have to do a better job. It is, first of all, to answer your question, is absolutely going to be progressive. It's not going to get any better. It's going to continue to be chronic and rampant, and we're going to continue to lose service members and veterans. If we, though, normalize early help seeking, so there you'll hear a lot of campaigns throughout the military, throughout the Department of Defense, about early help seeking. That is really the key to getting in front of all of this and making sure that we're encouraging people to seek help early before there is a DUI or a domestic incident. And that a lot of times those are the ways that people pop up in the mental health clinic if you're a service member. It's not because they said, you know what, I'm going to seek help early. We're not communicating well. I find that I'm actually, drinking more. That's usually not that level of awareness. And there's a lot of denial with that.
That's huge, Dr. Rainbows. And Christine, I can see you want to say something with that.
Go
ahead. I know you want to
just like with most other disorders, whether it's a mental health disorder or a physical health disorder, early intervention, early treatment is always the best. PTSD doesn't have to develop. We have acute stress, delayed stress, cumulative stress. If you address it in the moment, it doesn't have to go on to develop into PTSD. It's highly treatable. We're not seeing them until it gets to that point, and that's unfortunate because it doesn't have to get to that point. Same thing with the substance use disorders. We can treat it early, nip it in the bud, and they can live happy, healthy lives. It's just unfortunate that we don't tend to see them until that point in time.
No, I think that's huge because I wanted to touch on that a little bit more because, Dr. Ramos and then Christine, you both piggybacking on this, that it doesn't have to get to that point. The earlier you can intervene, the better. And I think that's a huge take-home message for any veterans, service members, or their families who are watching this, whether you're watching this live with us on the replay, that the earlier we can intervene, the better. And I think what you said, Dr. Ramos, was so impactful because a lot of times we don't see it until it leads to potentially domestic violence, suicide, some other anger type of situation or some other coping or, situation where we lose a service member that we didn't have to lose.
Right. And also what I find is that seeking help is viewed as punitive because people are coming into the mental health clinic by way of a DUI, by way of a domestic incident. So I think they're making that connection. On top of that, my experience as a uniform wearing, in my time, licensed clinical social worker who is running this clinic, they see a uniform. They don't see necessarily a helping professional. So we really did kind of go over to now we're hiring more contract civilians and DOD civilians to provide the therapy because we feel like that sort of breaks down that barrier. But they're definitely making that connection between going to mental health is punitive, going and getting substance abuse treatment is punitive, which further perpetuates the stigma.
So what do we do? I mean, we're kind of in a conundrum because, we talk about the military culture sometimes that military culture, like you're strong, you're serving your country, you're supposed to be this strong individual. Sometimes if you seek help, then you may be, determined that maybe you can't deploy right now, or we're going to have to delay you on the combat zone. So what do we do? I mean, it's a conundrum in a way. I'm
It
curious.
really is.
Mm.
It really is.
Educate, advocate. Let them know that it's a treatable disease. It doesn't have to go on to that. It's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. And if they undergo treatment, we can get them back and in the fight sooner rather than later.
You talk about education, and CJ, I'm going to come to you. I hear you want to say something. So when it comes to education, is it just about educating the service member, or do we need education on a larger level, just in the military in general? CJ, I know you have some thoughts on this.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a veteran as well, Army veteran. I served 2000 to about 2003. Was medically discharged because I injured my back. But I believe it needs to be on a whole spectrum there. Like, this stuff should be talked about on base. The minute should be talked about from the minute you enter. I think it should just be a well-rounded thing. Because one of the things that I've recognized with working with veterans in the battalion group at Desert Hope is that there's a connection, and I can sit and I can talk all day about getting help in education, but amazing. I can have a battalion member say the same thing I just said, and it's just like, wow, whoa, having someone understand that. So I just think it should be educated around the board. Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dr. Ramos, I could see you had something to add to that.
Yeah. This is a topic that I am very familiar with. I think that the answer is policy change. The answer is policy change, or one of the answers, I should say. Maybe not the answer, but it's policy change, right? It's creating an environment where people would feel comfortable going to the mental health clinic, to the substance abuse clinic, to the family advocacy clinic, and seeking help. And the issue is we are taking things away from the service member that actually serve as protective factors. And we have a really low threshold for someone seeking care and saying that they're impaired. Well, they're not necessarily impaired, especially if they're coming on their own. And so we don't necessarily need to take their weapon right away. We don't need to take them away from being able to jump out of airplanes and scuba dive and all the things that actually keep them healthy, so to speak. So what my experience has been that when that happens, so a commander and a medical officer says, you can't jump, you can't fly, you can't shoot a weapon, then that individual will then stop working out. They'll stop eating well.
Yep.
Like they tend to give up on just about everything, which makes the problem worse. And that individual will start spiraling, the family goes downhill, and all those things. So it is important to change some policies with respect to giving the individual more privacy, and not necessarily calling the commander right away and saying, hey, Airman Smith is at mental health. You got to take away all his duties. So that I think is really how you get at the problem systemically.
Oh, I think that's you. CJ, did you want to piggyback or add anything to that?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Ramos, because I agree 110% with what you're saying there, because all that does is allow the person just to continue to isolate more. People are going to look and see that, oh, they took that away. I'm struggling with something. I'm not going to say that because I still want to be able to jump and I still want to do this. So I agree.
So the policy initiative. So one of the things I also want to talk about here is the impact and the barriers to care. We have another slide we want to talk about. And I think this slide is important because if you're a loved one of a service member and you're trying to see, maybe you think your loved one may be struggling, the impact are some good signs for you to realize: personality changes, inability to connect, financial troubles, family hardships. Does anybody, Christine, when loved ones are seeing this, what should be their reaction? How do they respond? Or if I'm an individual and I notice, I have had problems connecting, how do I process that?
So it's interesting because I'm probably the only member on the panel that's not service member, but I am a military spouse. So I know firsthand how all of this can impact the family. I see the behaviors, I see the issues, I see the troubles. I go to the post-appointment briefings. I'm told this is what you can expect your loved one to behave like. This is normal behavior. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it until it crosses this threshold. The problem is that it needs to be addressed before it crosses that threshold. The hypervigilance, the nightmares, things like that. So you start to see that, but the family members don't know what to do. They don't know who to reach out to because they don't also want to ruin their husband's career or their spouse's career, I should say. So being able to know who to reach out to, how to get help, where it's available, and what can be done is critical for family members as well.
So what would be your advice on that, Christine? Because you said, your husband, you've had to, deal with someone who's a service member. So if I'm someone and I'm listening to this, what would be your first step? I know we can't give them everything, but what's the first couple of steps that they could take?
It's a good question because it's been a minute. I don't know beyond having a conversation with a service member when they've calmed down about it, education, reaching out to supportive family members, peers in the community. CJ brought up a great point that peer support is usually far more effective, at least initially, than professional help because it's somebody that they can trust, that they know that's been there, done that. So having a list of peer support members in the community that might be able to help. I know the VA has, at least in Tampa, has a fantastic peer support program. So those would be avenues to go.
No, I love that. The support, talking to the loved one when they've come down, making them realize this. So Dr. Ramos, at what point do they need to seek help, professional help? Someone like yourself or the therapist we have in the panel today, or reaching out to some place like American Addiction Centers because they are realizing that their loved one is drinking more or it's getting out of control. When do you do that? How do you know when that's time?
So as a family member, the approach to take is usually to get that individual to buy in to the fact that they are impaired. Like give them specific examples of how they're not functioning in the social setting, in the professional setting. Otherwise, they're just going to sort of feel judged. They're going to sort of feel like they're twisting my arm, and they're not going to want to go. So really, what we know from the research is that there is a much higher success rate for folks who are going because they want to go and they recognize that I need the mental health care, I need the substance abuse treatment. So I think that is more of a gentle approach, more of an approach of, hey, let me give you some objective data to really help convince you that this is a necessary thing, not only to save your career, but perhaps maybe save your family as well. So getting them to come on their own, I think, is key because their chances for success are much higher.
Oh, that's really good to point out, to have that conversation. I love what Christine said also about finding the support. Are there other support groups that are out there that can support you? When we think about the stigma, and we talked about this, I know Dr. Ramos, you're talking about, we need to deal with this on a policy level, but we also have to deal with this. That's a structural stigma, I would think, from policy, self-stigma. We talk about shame and then public stigma. CJ, when it comes to stigma, how do you think we need to start changing this? How do we begin to change the mindset around addiction and mental health and the prevalence of that among our military members?
Yes, ma'am. One of the things I believe it definitely starts within self, but then of course through the educational piece of it, making, and I believe that we've come a long way. There's still work that needs to be done in the world when it comes to mental health. But at least we're talking more about it. Whether we have Mental Health Awareness Month and different things like that. But I believe it starts within the individual. One of the things I do as a therapist, I ask the individual, like, how do you feel about you? How do you feel, what's going on with you that tell me a little bit more about you and your views, on different things. And one of the things I found that was very profound was that a lot of people feel like, I'm not even going to go to the Department of Veteran Affairs and seek help because I didn't serve no more. That's the only reason why I feel like I should get services is because I went to war and I didn't go to war, so I'm not, and, different things like that. And you'll be very surprised, just the ideas that an individual has. So I believe it starts with self. We continue to educate on a broader level, but digging more into the individual that's sitting right in front of you,
Mm-hmm. Dr. Ramos, did you want to piggyback on that? I could see you're nodding your head there about, starting with self, but also addressing that public perception.
Yeah, I think that addressing that public perception and more so normalizing that early help seeking is the key. Also, too, I like what Christine said about social support. Social support is key because if we look at now, and it's just kind of like taking a look at society and more interpersonal skills. So you say somebody, some of this is generational. I think, I joined the Air Force in 1993, and I spent 28 years in the Air Force. I enlisted and I retired in 2021, and I saw things change. I saw the interpersonal skills of the service member decline. I almost don't feel qualified to say that, but I saw that with the age of technology, with an over reliance on phones and smartphones and social media and all of that. So we really got away from that face-to-face. And as therapists, the three of us are therapists, and when we meet with young people, oftentimes their experience is, this was great. And then I often say, well, when was the last time you sat with someone for about an hour just to talk without looking at a phone or without looking at a computer? So I think that's a really big part of this is really trying to keep that in those interpersonal skills and teach those within the ranks, so that people can actually be more inclined to lean on each other socially, because that, I think, is really critical to getting at this problem of mental health and substance abuse.
And you talk about normalizing. How do we normalize? I think that's the challenge that we face, right? And I think, of course, conversations like we're having today with you as therapists is important, because hopefully somebody's listening to this. If you're listening, one, share this out, because we think that this is important information that more people need to hear during Military Appreciation Month, but also sharing stories. But is there anything else that we can do to normalize this? How do we begin that process within the military?
Yeah, because the military is so rank centered, I had the best experience as somebody who was a supervisor and sometimes acting flight commander, and being really open and transparent with the people that I supervised, and saying, when I had this problem or that problem, I went and sought help. So I think, the people that are the higher ranking individuals have got to be the ones to say it's going to be okay. But they can't say that out of one side of their mouth, and then out of the other side, you go to mental health, and now I'm taking everything away from you. So that's why I kind of get back to, we really got to aim at this policy problem and really start protecting people's rights to privacy, so that they have more of a feeling of safety when they go get help.
No, I think that's really huge. And so, speaking of getting help, I want to transition the discussion into what treatment is like for veterans and service members. I know we have specialized programs at several of our facilities at American Addiction Centers, Desert Hope, River Oaks, Recovery First. Several of our facilities have programs specialized to deal with this. And also, I want to just let anyone know who's watching right now, if you have any questions, make sure to drop them in the chat. We do have time for a few questions. So if you have a question for our expert panel here, we encourage you to drop it to the chat, and we will get to as many questions as possible. But let's as we kind of wrap our discussion up here, why does treatment need to be a little bit different or cater to the veteran population, and how is that different? Christine, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So at River Oaks, we have what I call a hybrid program, where the clients actually get to work just as with other veterans. We have a veteran-specific group where it's all veterans, responders. So firefighters, EMS, law enforcement are also included in that group. And in that group, we use the language that they're familiar with. We have familiarity with the culture of the responder veteran community. And we focus on issues that are prevalent in that community, like moral injury, issues with over control of emotions, PTSD, how to relate to other people, attachment issues, things like that may impact the general civilian population, but not to the same degree that they do with the military population. But in addition to that, I think it's really critical that they learn how to interact and assimilate with the civilian population as well, especially for the people who have retired or have been medically discharged, because a huge disconnect exists between service members and the civilian population. And we found that they heal much more rapidly and more effectively if they can get a civilian to actually understand their experiences.
Ooh, that's good. So as I hear you talking about this, Christine, we're looking at a two-pronged hybrid approach. And we do this at many of our facilities where you have a program where you're integrated with other people like you, other service members, other veterans, other first responders who understand the trauma experience that you've been through. But also there's an integration component because you found, which is profound, that the healing is actually accelerated or helped in some way being connected to the civilian population as well. Dr. Ramos, anything, or Jemison, anything you want to add to that?
No, certainly. So my perspective on this is I think that, having spent 28 years in the Air Force, there's so many things that are ingrained in me and in a lot of service members. And those things are structure. Those things are a lot have to do with, when we have a meeting, like we're really confused when we're not starting the meeting on time, or like people aren't sitting in the seats, right? So having some flexibility, that there's a level of rigidity within the military culture that is also a barrier to treatment, I would say. That can be a barrier to treatment because I'm thinking so rigidly. I'm also thinking I'm either fixed or I'm not fixed. And you'll hear terminology amongst that population that, hey, I'm broke or I'm not broke. Well, it's really not that simple, but that is the method of thinking. So again, somebody comes in for care, whether it's mental health care or substance abuse care, they slap this piece of paper on them and say, you can't do X, Y, and Z. So they have this perception that I'm broken. Well, again, a lot of that black and white thinking, a lot of that all or nothing thinking, and you take a person's, I've seen this before, you take a Navy SEAL's weapon away, you take his ability to jump and scuba dive, you take that away from him, he will look at you and tell you, I lost everything. That's sort of that is, yeah. So again, it's really a lot of all or nothing thinking, sort of rigid thinking, and so I think a big part of the therapeutic approach should be to kind of try to combat that level of that level of all or nothing thinking.
Right. So it's not, and I want to address this, and I think we need to address this before I move on. When you say that it's all or nothing, like I'm broken or not, tell me about that. Is there a spectrum? So that people can understand that, because that was such a poignant point that you pointed out, Dr. Ramos, that I just didn't want to jump over it.
Right. So there is this, and the key to us as clinicians is to show them that spectrum, right? So they might think, I'm all the way gone. I've lost it all. Can't jump, can't scuba dive, can't shoot a weapon. Maybe I'm going through a divorce. I got legal issues. But there's still a lot of good in that person. And I think what we have to do as mental health professionals, whatever, regardless of the discipline, is to make sure that they understand that they're not all the way gone. Like, regardless of what's going on in your life, there's still a lot of good things. So look at how you got to this point, and let's go ahead and help you understand that you're strong, and you're strong enough to say, hey, I can be brave and admit that these things need to be worked on and start working on them.
That's good. You know what? Because it makes me think it's not an all or nothing. It's an and. And I once heard somebody say this, like, I can be struggling and be strong. I can be dealing with addiction and still be a good parent. So sometimes we have, like you said, these black or whites, but when we can put the word and in there, it allows us to kind of navigate that in a different way. And I think that's really powerful, Dr. Ramos, what you said. So CJ, Mr. Jemison, I want to go back to you. What are some of the common challenges or mental health conditions that you're seeing veterans come in? I think we think about the PTSD, and Christine kind of went through some of those, but if you could go through some of the things that you see or some of the biggest things that the veterans and military members are dealing with when they're coming in.
Oh, yes, ma'am. So outside of PTSD, definitely major depressive disorder, anxiety, GAD, generalized anxiety disorder as well. But I'm a firm believer on healing starts, because, to recover means to heal. So you're in a healing process. But I believe a lot of it has to do about what's going on here. And Dr. Ramos talked about that when we look at that black and white thinking, those cognitive distortions, those negative thought processes, those self-defeating thoughts that just keep an individual in such a place. I believe that you have the ability, but I help my clients understand that they, need to also understand that they have the ability to change. Because one of the things, they get to levels, so they start feeling great. It's almost like a honeymoon phase of thinking. They start feeling great, and here comes a decline. No, I can't really do this. Why do you feel like you can't do this? well, and then here comes a lot of the negative things and negative thinking errors. So just helping individuals change the way they think goes a long way as well.
Oh, that's huge. I think mindset, like you said, the cognitive behavioral therapy that we do with people, you know, are there any other therapies that we should mention that are specific or that are beneficial to the veteran population? I know people have heard of EMDR, but may not know what that is. If anybody wants to tackle some of the other modalities or treatment modalities we're able to use besides the cognitive behavioral therapy to really help this population, particularly if they're dealing with trauma or PTSD.
Sure. So I'll say that the modalities that I typically use in the group therapy sessions are cognitive processing therapy, which explores 5 areas that trauma tends to impact our beliefs in. And those tend to be power and control, safety, trust, intimacy, and esteem, and how our traumatic experiences alter our beliefs or reinforce our beliefs in those 5 core areas. So we work to challenge the beliefs in that. Another modality that I find highly effective is radically open dialectical behavior therapy. That therapy is targeted to people who have emotion over control issues as opposed to emotion under control, which you definitely see more prevalently in the military population. They've learned to suppress their emotions, control their emotions. There's only one acceptable emotion, and that emotion is anger. And helping them realize that the concept of that is being radically open. You don't know what you don't know. You might be wrong about something, you might be right about something, which goes right to that black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking. It exists on a continuum. Things can be right or wrong or anywhere in between. And yes, of course, EMDR is fantastic in individual therapy. All of them.
Explain what that, I want to stop you there. If you can explain what EMDR therapy is, because I think people may have heard of it or maybe not, but I think it's a really big thing when it comes to PTSD that you hear about. So either Dr. Ramos or Christine, one of you guys could explain that to us so we have an understanding.
You want me to do it, Dr. Ramos, or do you want to do it?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so EMDR therapy is highly effective in addressing trauma, depression, anxiety, substance use disorders, and a bunch of different things. The theory is that when something traumatic happens to us, it gets stored in the emotional centers of our brain, and we need help getting it transferred back into long-term storage. So EMDR is a therapy that helps work with that. It's a bottom-up process versus a top-down, meaning we work with the emotions, the body sensations, the visual imagery associated with the traumatic memories to help us change our beliefs about it. It allows us to see other information about the events that are also true. Stuff like, you know, if I believe it was all my fault that one of my fellow Marines died, I might be able to see additional information that, hey, it wasn't completely my fault. You know, the bad guys had something to do with it as well. And it allows us to tap into that information fairly rapidly with tremendously effective results.
So I think the good news here is we're looking at all of this is there is hope, right? I think if I were to sum it up, and I want to give each of you a final thought to say, but if I were to sum it up, one, that, you know, simply being a military or service member, there are risk factors. We talked about the combat experience, psychological distress, the military culture, the increased risk for injury, all of those things that impact us. But we also talked about, hey, if you're struggling, you may not realize it at first. You might be in denial. But if you start to notice changes in personality, that you're irritable more, different things, that you're turning to substances to cope, that you need to seek help, because what we know is this does not get better on its own typically, that you do need some type of intervention to be able to go back to life the way you wanted it to be, or to live the life that you really want. And you guys have given us some really hopeful advice here about all the treatment of modalities available. You know, when you think about all the ways that you're able to help veterans and the programs that we have out there, I just hope that will encourage somebody today to know they're not alone. There's help. We have resources. We have modalities. We have things that are able to treat this. So I want to give each of you a chance to say a final thought. If there were any last words that you would give to a veteran, a military service member, or even a family member, and maybe Christine, your message should be to family members. But CJ and Dr. Ramos, as you both being veterans yourselves, I would love for you to just impart some final wisdom. So I'm going to start with you, CJ. Just any final insight or any takeaway you'd want someone to have from today's discussion?
Yes, ma'am. So I would want individuals to know, veterans to know, even active duty, that you are not alone. You know, there are resources available, you know, and not just that, there's a connection that comes from everyone who may have served. But the biggest thing is just helping people understand that you are not alone. There is help available, and no, you don't have to be ashamed. You know, everyone understands. People go through things, but we're here. We're here for you.
We're here for you. I love that. And if we have any other questions out there, we'll take that as Christine and Dr. Ramos are getting going. Christine, from a family member, from a wife who has had, you know, a loved one in the military, what would be your message, your final thoughts for families?
So I have a combination for the service members as well. For every service member out there, you've already survived incredibly impossible, difficult situations. You made it through boot camp, basic training. So you've survived BUD/S, right? You already possess all the characteristics, all the qualities, all the traits you need to get through treatment, mental health issues, substance use issues. You just may have lost sight of that, and we can definitely help you find that again. You already have it there. It's just a matter of translating it from that set of skills to this set of skills. The other part is there's hope. There's hope and there's help. You don't have to suffer. You don't have to live with the nightmares. You don't have to live with the guilt and shame. You don't have to live with the grief. There are ways to work through it. The longer you avoid it, the worse it gets. Let's get it over and get it done with and get you back to being the best you possible.
Love that. You don't have to live with it. I think that is the catchphrase. You don't have to live like this. That is huge. Dr. Ramos, our final thoughts for today.
I really appreciate, first of all, the opportunity to share. I really want to say that to all the service members and family members out there, that true strength and resiliency is seeking help early, is getting the help when you're at this place where it's education that you're looking for. So if you're having relational problems, so then go learn how to communicate better with your partner. If you're not exactly sure about the effect of substances, you know, on the body, or how it can, you know, substance abuse can impact your career negatively or your family negatively, get that help early. I think what we have is a system in place that really associates seeking help with weakness, when it really does take a person of courage and bravery. That pretty much that same bravery that they have to show, that resilience. And we really need to define the term resiliency and strength within the ranks, so that people understand that that really means that I'm going to take really good care of myself, you know, really good care of my battle buddies, and really be healthy so that I can have longevity in my career, so that I can be more successful. So I really think that we have to get at the policies. We really need to relook at those and really create a system where service members do not feel like seeking help is punitive. These are things, these are tools that are going to help these individuals long after they're done serving. And so, again, thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Once again, our panel today, CJ Jimison, a therapist at Desert Hope Treatment Center, Christine Hernando, a therapist at River Oaks Treatment Center, and Dr. Stephen Ramos, who's actually the assistant clinical director at River Oaks Treatment Center. Thank you to both to CJ and Dr. Ramos for your service to our country. We greatly appreciate that, and we definitely want to appreciate you on this Military Appreciation Month. So thank you all for tuning in today. Thank you again to our panelists, and we hope everyone has a great day.